Hi everyone, my name is Bill Yoder. I'm the breeder of the Depeche Mode line of tomatoes.
Hi everyone, today's review will be focused on the novelties of tomato breeding. A year ago, I showed you unique new varieties from the Starfighters series. It was a fascinating journey because it's always very interesting to talk about new varieties, so today's episode will not be an exception, and we'll continue this pleasant tradition. Today we're gonna talk about brand new varieties from the Depeche Mode line by Bill Yoder. Yes, this tomato series is named exactly after a popular band. Moreover, each variety here bears the name of one of the songs of the British team, and you will agree, this is a very original decision. Tomatoes as a song. Well, it's curious to say the least. All the varieties that I'll tell you about in this review appeared quite recently, but I have already grown them and of course I will tell you about them in detail.
Tomato Express is on its way. Take your seats, we are getting started. It's really hard to explain the Strangelove for tomatoes, but it's much easier to grow the Strangelove tomato, probably the most beautiful variety from the Depeche Mode line.
The Strangelove tomato owes its beauty primarily to the varieties that brought it into the world. These are two very famous tomatoes that you have probably already heard of and most likely even grown, namely Alice's Dream and Rebel Starfighter Prime. Such a lucky combination of varieties for crossing, in my opinion, gave just a great result. And Strangelove tomato absorbed their best qualities. The plants are indeterminate. I grew them in 2 stems and by midsummer their height was about 5 feet or 1.5 meters. And near the end of the season they reached a mark of 6 feet or 1.8 meters and were also quite resistant to major tomato diseases. But first of all, of course, I'd like to note the unique appearance of the fruit. It's truly exceptional. The basic yellow-orange color is complemented by pink touches and anthocyanin patterns. And the more sunlight the tomatoes get, the more unusual they look. Even in the less than ideal light in my greenhouse, the tomatoes turned out very beautifully. I can only imagine what would happen if I grew them outdoors. And also, these tomatoes were one of the very first to ripen and I collected them before the onset of cold weather. All in all, a lot of positive emotions. Strangelove is a wonderful variety of wonderful parents. The weight of the fruit varied between 7 and 9 ounces, or 200 and 256 grams. Yes, this is an average size, but there were quite a lot of tomatoes and the yield I would rate as good. When I made the first cut, I could smell the strong tomato flavor spreading throughout the kitchen. The flesh is juicy, yellow-orange with flecks of pink tones, which become more numerous at full ripening. As for the taste, Strangelove has the flavor of a real homegrown tomato, sweet with a slight and pleasant tartness. On the other hand, it would be strange if such beautiful tomatoes did not turn out to be delicious. Growing this kind of variety is always a pleasure, because it is in these moments that you realize that the Strangelove for tomatoes is not strange at all, and therefore in the fact that this variety will soon gain its well-deserved popularity. Personally, I do not doubt at all. And to conclude my story about the Strangelove tomato variety, I would like to finish with lyrics from the song after which it is named, and it sounds like this: I'm always willing to learn when you've got something to teach, and I'll make it all worthwhile. I'll make your heart smile. This was the first tomato in the Depeche Mode series named Strangelove, and let's move on to the next variety in the line called Shake the Disease. Plants with a regular leaf, when grown in 2 stems, reached a height of 5 feet 7 inches or 1.7 meters by the end of July. The tomatoes are quite pretty, rounded in shape and interesting in color. Dark red with green stripes with a metallic tint. I love tomatoes of this color. And also, on the upper bunches the fruits became noticeably bigger. The first harvested tomatoes weighed from 5 to 8 ounces, or 140 to 240 grams, and one of the largest reached the mark of 11 ounces, or 323 grams. The flesh is dark crimson in color, and the taste is clearly dominated by sweetness. There is almost no acidity at all, except only remotely. If in a nutshell, Shake the Disease are fragrant and juicy tomatoes. and their taste qualities have only improved during the season, and I regularly used them to make a salad, and believe me, not all tomatoes I grow get into it. Incidentally, the next representative of the Depeche Mode tomato series has also managed to make it this far. It also has a lovely name because it is called Precious. This variety was not so tall and noticeably smaller than the others of this tomato series, and the plants are quite compact with not very wide foliage. By the end of the season, their height was from 3 to 5 feet or 1 to 1.5 meters. Fruits are flat-rounded, sometimes ribbed, of bright sunny color. If you wait until they are fully ripe, the coloring starts to reveal noticeable orange and pink shades. The tomatoes weighed from 5 to 8 ounces or 152 to 231 grams, and their size didn't change much during the season. Inside I was welcomed by the same bright marmalade flesh, but the main thing about the Precious tomatoes is their fruity flavor with the predominance of sweetness, long-lasting and exotic. The flavor is interesting, and both for salad and for eating raw, Precious tomato is great. And of course, I must mention the fact that this variety grew in my greenhouse and outdoors, and in all conditions felt great and almost didn't catch any diseases. In addition, I should note that the different growing conditions did not affect the taste of the fruit. Well, let's continue our journey through the Depeche Mode tomato series, because there is at least one more good reason to do so, and that reason is called Suffer Well.
Suffer Well tomato has become one of my personal favorites not only in the Depeche Mode series, but in the season as a whole, and here is why.
Suffer Well is a perfect example of what a true exotic tomato should be, and in addition to its external beauty, I found a rich internal content, which I'll tell you about in detail very soon. The plants are sturdy and vigorous, with large potato leaf foliage, which I especially like, and if by midsummer their height was about 5 feet 7 inches or 1.7 meters, towards the end of the season they easily passed the 7-inch or 2-meter mark, and I limited their growth. The fruits are ox heart-shaped, large in size, purple in color, and decorated with green stripes. I don't know how to explain it, but sometimes tomatoes already look delicious on their own, even if you haven't tasted them yet. But finally, that was to be found out during the tasting. And of course, I was completely satisfied with their size, because already at the first harvest, tomatoes weighed from 11 ounces to 1 pound and 4 ounces, or 315 to 577 grams. And their dark red flesh with greens in the seed cavities inspired me with enthusiasm, but I was a little disappointed by the fact that the tomatoes had very few seeds. In the end, my hopes were justified 100%, because the taste of these tomatoes is very good. Sweetness and a slight pleasant acidity with the flavor of berries create the very picture for the sake of which it is worth growing your own tomatoes instead of buying them in the store. In my tomato career, I've tasted many dark striped varieties, and among them there were indeed quite a few delicious ones, but it's that subtle berry flavor that makes Suffer Well stand out from the rest. To put it simply, I rejoiced like a child who had just been given a delicious candy bar. By the way, in their song, Depeche Mode said the following words: "I found treasure not where I thought." Well, in some ways, this text coincides with the story of my experience with Suffer Well tomato. Initially, all my attention was focused on Strangelove, and I didn't expect anything outstanding from Suffer Well, but now I really consider it one of the best varieties for lovers of tomato exotics and for all those who love and grow tomatoes. And another interesting new variety from the Depeche Mode series is called Behind the Wheel. By the way, this time it was a girl who was behind the wheel, but let's get back to tomatoes. Behind the Wheel is also an indeterminate variety. The height of the plants by midsummer was 6 feet or 1.8 meters. The foliage is compact and the tomatoes are beautiful, rounded, slightly ribbed, yellow with pink stripes coming from the center. Fruits ripen quickly enough and and you need to be ready to pick them in time. But you should not be in a hurry either, because their maximum flavor such bicolors give out exactly at the stage of full ripening. The average weight of the tomatoes ranged from 8 to 12 ounces or 234 to 342 grams. Yellow, orange and pink tones prevail on the cut, and the longer you let the tomatoes ripen, the more pink color you'll find inside. That is a classic bicolor, and not just a bicolor, but a tomato with the taste of exotic fruit. The flavor is refreshing and pleasant. It has sweetness and balanced acidity, perfectly complementing it, as well as a noticeable fruity aftertaste. The tomatoes are juicy and flavorful. Behind the wheel is definitely a decent variety and worth growing. But that's not all. Of course, as is tradition, sometimes I ask breeders themselves to share the story of their creations. And today we'll be joined by none other than Bill Yoder personally, so it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to him.
Hi everyone, my name is Bill Yoder. I'm the breeder of the Depeche Mode line of tomatoes. I want to talk a few minutes about the line. The idea came to me from the first variety in my collection I created, which is called Strangelove. I was looking at the tomato one day and was observing how different the exterior looked, something I hadn't really seen before. That exterior color is kind of turning ripe with the striping, and I thought it looked kind of strange. And I started thinking, I like the word strange, and then another word for tomato is love apple, so I put together Strangelove, and that was the incubation of the idea to create a whole line around Depeche Mode, starting with the Strangelove tomato. So most of the tomatoes in this line are going to be striped with the exception of one. So we have Strangelove. We have Suffer Well, which is a purple tomato with green metallic stripes on a potato leaf plant. The name came about because the plant had struggled through a time in the summer where I wasn't really feeding properly, and it had gotten super hot in the greenhouse, and everything was starving for food and overheated. And this one plant stood out as something that kind of withstood the suffering period, as I call it, and then went on to rebound and produce loads of fruit. It just became a really strong plant the rest of the season. So another variety in the collection is called Shake the Disease. It is a chocolate-colored tomato with metallic green stripes, about the same size as Suffer Well. These are in the 8 to 12 ounce range usually, 12 ounce being pretty average here. So this tomato was named because I had an outbreak later in the season of leaf mold in the greenhouse, and this was the one variety that just seemed to be impervious to it. It didn't catch the disease. It just kept producing. It outlasted all the other plants. So that variety became the name Shake the Disease. Let's see, that's three. Another tomato in the collection is called Everything Counts in Large Amounts. It is a red tomato with gold yellow stripes, maybe towards the orange if you let it get super ripe. So that tomato was named Everything Counts in Large Amounts because of the large amount of tomatoes that it sets later in the season. It's not an early producer, it's middle to late, and it really comes on late and just produces loads and loads of tomatoes towards the end of the season. A really strong plant too, with a really thick stalk, tail leaf foliage. Another variety in the collection is called Behind the Wheel. It's more of a yellow golden background tomato with green stripes. I was looking at it one day and it had a really nice stripe pattern on it, kind of uniform, and it kind of reminded me of the spokes on a bicycle wheel. So that became Behind the Wheel. And I believe there's one left, I believe, in the collection. It's called Precious. It is a yellow tomato on a plant that it was a cross of a dwarf and a large tomato plant. And so it's settling somewhere kind of in between those plant habits. But it's a really good productive tomato, yellow tomato with a yellow interior, a little bit of a pink blush on the surface. The name Precious came about because I didn't like the growth pattern on the seedling, and I kind of left those plants sitting in the driveway for several weeks. I was going to toss them out, but they just, without water or any care, they just kept growing and looking really strong. So I decided to go ahead and plant them, and it became a really good tomato once I planted it and observed it and harvested it. I realized it was a variety that I needed to continue to create. And the name Precious was because even something that looks like it's not going to be good or might not be the best thing ever still ended up being precious to me. It became something really good, and so I was glad I didn't throw it away.
In closing this video, I would like to thank Bill for his story about the tomatoes in this series, and to let you know that I will soon be showing you more of his tomato varieties, this time the dwarf tomatoes from the Prince line. And believe me, it will be no less exciting a journey. This was my review of the new Depeche Mode tomato series by Bill Yoder, a series in which each variety is named after a song. And what favorite song would you name your own tomato variety after? Tell me in the comments, I'm sure you'll have tons of good ideas.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe, and of course, love tomatoes, grow tomatoes. This is the Lucky Garden channel, and see you soon.